It's not yours anymore, don't come back. I was hospitalized for 21 days, and my son gave my house to his wife's family. I said, enjoy it. A week later, the surprise I'd prepared undid everything. My son was blocking the front door of my own house, not standing near it, not leaning against it, blocking it, arms out, chin up, the posture of a man who has rehearsed this moment and decided he is ready for it. I had been in the hospital for 21 days. I came home in a taxi with a cane I was still learning to use, a discharge folder from St. Catherine's Medical Center, and a prescription for a blood thinner that needed to be filled before evening. My hip replacement had gone wrong in the way hip replacements sometimes go wrong. Slowly, then all at once, a complication that turned a 4-day procedure into 3 weeks of IV lines and physical therapy, and a surgeon named Dr. Paul Marsh who visited me every morning at 7:15 a.m. and said progress in the cautious tone of a man rationing optimism. I had been calling Stephen from the hospital. 14 calls over 21 days. He'd answered 3 times. Short conversations, clipped, the specific rhythm of someone who is waiting to hang up. I told myself he was busy. He had a demanding job. Jessica kept a full social calendar. They had lives. I told myself a lot of things during those 21 days. My son stood in the doorway of the house I had lived in for 34 years and said, "It's not yours anymore. Don't come back." Behind him, through the open door, I could see Jessica standing in my living room. She was wearing my emerald earrings, the ones William had given me for our 25th anniversary, bought from a jeweler on 5th Street that has since closed, wrapped in tissue paper the color of seafoam because he'd remembered, somehow, that I loved that color. The earrings I had kept in the mahogany box on my dresser for 11 years since William died. The earrings I had never let anyone touch. She was wearing them like they were nothing. Her mother, Patricia, was on the far side of the room rearranging my furniture, moving my wing-back chair, the one I reupholstered myself in 1987, toward the window like she was staging a house she already owned. Her father, Howard, was not visible from the doorway. I would learn later he was in William's study. I leaned on my cane and looked at my son's face. I looked at it for a long time. The face I had kissed goodnight for 18 years. The face that had cried at his father's funeral, that had grinned at his wedding, that had looked up at me from a hospital bassinet 41 years ago and made me feel, for the first time in my life, that I understood exactly what I was supposed to be doing on this earth. Enjoy it, I said quietly. Then I turned around and walked back to the taxi, which, thank God, had not yet left. They thought they'd won. They had absolutely no idea what they'd just started. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 68 years old, and before I retired 6 years ago, I spent 31 years working in banking compliance, specifically in the identification and reporting of financial fraud. I reviewed suspicious transaction reports. I trained junior analysts to recognize the patterns that precede institutional theft. I testified as an expert witness in 4 federal proceedings. I am not a woman who is easily surprised by the ways people choose to steal from each other. I am, however, capable of being surprised by my own son. Let me tell you about the house. It sits on Claremont Avenue in a neighborhood that was solidly middle class when William and I bought it in 1990 for $187,000 and has since become something considerably more interesting. 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a garden William planted in sections over 15 years that still blooms every spring whether I tend it or not. William died in his study in that house, at his antique desk reading. A heart attack so fast and quiet that I didn't know it had happened until I brought him coffee and he didn't respond. The house is mine outright, has been since 1998 when we paid off the mortgage 8 years early. It is held in a revocable living trust, the Claremont Avenue Property Trust, that William's attorney, Frank Delaney, helped us establish before William's first heart scare in 1996. The trust document is explicit. The property passes directly to me upon William's death and cannot be transferred, sold, or encumbered without the signature of both myself and the designated co-trustee. The co-trustee, as of 4 months ago, was Diane Anderson. That detail is the whole story, but we'll get there. Stephen came into our lives in 1982, 3 years after William and I married. He was a sweet child, genuinely sweet, the kind of boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a beetle and brought stray cats home and called his grandmother every Sunday without being reminded. Something shifted in his late 20s, gradually, the way shifts do when you can't identify the exact moment they begin. He married Jessica Calloway in 2018, and Jessica's parents, Howard and Patricia Thompson, became fixtures in our lives in the way that certain people become fixtures, steadily, thoroughly, until you look up one day and realize they are everywhere, and you are not sure when that happened. I liked Howard and Patricia well enough at first. They were socially fluent, well-dressed, interested in everything. The kind of couple who always knew where to eat and arrived at dinner parties with exactly the right wine. It wasn't until my 3rd year of retirement, when I had time to observe rather than participate, that I noticed the questions they asked about real estate were too specific to be casual, too targeted, too interested in zoning, in lot size, in the particular geography of who owned what on which block. I filed it away, the way I'd spent 31 years filing things away. Then I had my surgery, and I stopped paying attention, and they moved. The taxi driver, a quiet man named Bernard, who had worked for the same car service for 19 years, according to the placard on the visor, dropped me at the Fairview Inn on Route 12 without asking questions. He helped me with my bag. He waited until I was through the lobby door before he drove away. I will think about Bernard Bernard's kindness for the rest of my life. I called Diane from the room before I had even taken off my coat. 2 words, Plan B, now. Diane Anderson and I have been friends since we were 28 years old, and sharing an office at a firm neither of us should have been working at. She practiced estate law for 36 years, the last 15 as a senior partner, before retiring to a house 20 minutes from mine. She is meticulous in the way that only certain people are meticulous. Not obsessively, not anxiously, but with the settled precision of someone who has simply always understood that details are where everything lives and dies. She also, as it happened, had been holding a folder I'd asked her to prepare 4 months ago, before my surgery, when I'd had a premonition I couldn't quite name. She arrived at the Fairview Inn in 45 minutes with a briefcase and a look on her face that told me she already knew more than I'd told her on the phone. They've been moving money, she said, before she'd sat down. She slid a bank statement across the desk. My account. The joint account I'd kept after William died, which Stephen had been listed on as a convenience for emergencies, I'd thought, for the kind of practical access that makes sense when a parent is aging and a child is nearby. 5 wire transfers, executed over 11 days while I was in the ICU. Each one neat, each one just under the $50,000 reporting threshold that I had spent years training people to recognize. Total, $220,000. My hands did not shake. They went very still, which is what they do when I am processing something at a depth below the usual emotional register. There's more, Diane said. She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. Property records for Claremont Avenue and the 6 streets surrounding it. Color-coded by ownership. 3 houses on my block, highlighted in yellow with acquisition dates in the last 8 months. All 3 acquired by entities that, through a chain of LLCs that Diane had spent 3 days untangling, traced back to Howard Thompson. I looked at the map, then I looked at where my house sat in relation to the others. He needs the corner lot, I said. Yes, Diane said. For rezoning. The Thompson Group filed a preliminary variance application with the city planning office 6 weeks ago, she said. Commercial mixed use. If they control enough of the block, the property values on everything adjacent triple, I said. Minimum. The attorney I spoke to this morning estimated 15 to 20 million in combined profit if the variance is approved and they can move quickly. I sat with that number for a moment. They hadn't just stolen my house. They had used it as the keystone of a scheme to strip an entire neighborhood. My neighbors, Eunice Carroll, who had lived next door for 22 years, the Pattersons, no relation to Howard, who had the garden on the corner, the Okonkwo's, with the twins who were 4 years old and drove their mother's car up and down the driveway. I looked at Diane. How long have you been building this file? She allowed herself a small, precise smile. Since you asked me to watch them. 4 months ago, I said. You had a feeling, she said. You've always had a feeling. 31 years in banking compliance. Yes, I'd had a feeling. What did they use to transfer the house? I asked. Power of attorney, she said. Forged, I believe, though we'll need a document examiner to confirm. Filed with the county recorder's office while you were sedated. The notary stamp is from a company that stopped operating in 2019. A dead notary stamp. Sloppy. The kind of error that happens when people believe they are operating without consequences. They don't know about the trust amendment, I said. They don't know about the trust amendment, Diane confirmed. The trust amendment. The one document. Filed 4 months ago, the week before my surgery. In a moment of preparation I couldn't fully explain to myself at the time. I had added Diane as co-trustee on the Claremont Avenue Property Trust, which meant that any transfer of the property, any transfer under any circumstances, required her signature. They had forged my signature. They had forged a power of attorney. They had walked into the county recorder's office with a dead notary stamp and transferred my house. They had not forged Diane's signature because they didn't know it was required. The transfer was already void, had been void from the moment they filed it. They just didn't know that yet, and I was going to let them enjoy not knowing it for exactly as long as it served me. The FBI has a file on Howard Thompson, Diane said. She'd been busy in the 4 months since I'd asked her to watch them. Busy in the meticulous, thorough way that made her one of the most effective attorneys I had ever seen work. Seattle, she said, pulling out a printed summary. Also Portland, Boise. A similar operation in 3 states over 12 years. Elderly homeowners. Predatory loan modifications disguised as assistance. Properties acquired through falsified documentation, stripped of equity, flipped before the fraud was traced back. Victims, 14 confirmed in the FBI's active case file, she said, 3 of whom lost their homes entirely. Most were in their 70s. Several had diminished capacity documented in hospital records, which they apparently targeted deliberately. She paused. The Seattle case has been building for 2 years. They have everything except a current active operation to bring charges on. The statute is almost up. I understood immediately. The FBI needed current evidence. Active fraud, currently being executed. They had the history. They needed the present. We can give them that, I said. We can give them that, she agreed. The next morning, Diane called Special Agent Thomas Reeves of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Reeves had 18 years with the Bureau. The last 6 focused on elder financial exploitation. He listened to Diane's summary for 11 minutes without interrupting, then asked a single question. How current is the activity? Active as of yesterday, Diane said. There was a brief silence on the line. I'll need to brief my supervisor, he said, and I'll need your documentation by this afternoon. It's already on its way to you, Diane said. The next 6 days were the most patient 6 days of my life. life. Patience is a skill. People treat it like a personality trait. You either have it or you don't, but that's not right. Patience is something you build from need and discipline, the same way you build anything else. I had built mine over 31 years of sitting in rooms with fraudsters who believed they were smarter than everyone else, watching them incriminate themselves one word at a time, waiting for the moment that couldn't be walked back. I stayed at the Fairview Inn. I did my physical therapy exercises every morning at 7 a.m. per Dr. Marsh's instructions. I ate meals in the hotel restaurant where a server named Louisa learned my order by the third day and brought my tea without being asked. I slept 7 hours a night, which is more than I'd slept in years. I did not contact Stephen. He called once on day 3, a short call, perfunctory, the tone of a man performing the minimum required version of checking in. I asked how he was. He said fine. He asked how I was. I said fine. He said he'd call again soon. He didn't. I spoke with Agent Reeves twice, and once with his colleague Agent Dana Callahan, who had 11 years in the Bureau and specialized in document fraud. Agent Callahan had already sent the forged power of attorney to the FBI's forensic document examiner, a man named Robert Park with 16 years in questioned document analysis. His preliminary finding came back on day 4. The notary seal was reproduced from a scan of a legitimate seal. The signature bore measurable inconsistencies with my known exemplars, and the document had been printed on paper stock manufactured after 2022, despite being dated 2021. Exhibit A forgery confirmed. I also spoke with Detective Sergeant Andrea Marsh of the county's Elder Fraud Unit, no relation to my surgeon, I asked, who had been coordinating with the FBI on the Thompson case and was preparing parallel state charges. She had 12 years in financial crimes and the specific demeanor of someone who has watched older people be victimized repeatedly and has made their peace with being relentless about it. Mrs. Wilson, she said on our first call, I want you to understand that what was done to you is a serious felony under both state and federal law. The forgery alone carries significant prison exposure. Combined with the wire fraud, the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and the interstate nature of the scheme. I spent 31 years in banking compliance, I said gently. A pause. Then you know exactly what they're facing, she said. I do, I said. I want to make sure they do too. On camera. Here is what I knew about the house. I knew Jessica had a standing salon appointment every Thursday at 2 p.m., 2 hours minimum, because she got both color and a blowout, and her colorist, a woman named Bree, ran chronically behind. I knew Stephen left for work at 8:30 a.m. and didn't return before 5:15 p.m. I knew Howard Thompson liked to work from the desk in William's study because Patricia had mentioned at a dinner 18 months ago that Howard preferred working from a proper desk in a quiet room. William's study was the quietest room in the house, and the desk, a 19th century partner's desk in figured walnut that William had found at an estate sale and refinished himself over 3 weekends, was the most proper piece of furniture in the building. And I knew the side door, the one that opens off the kitchen into the small passageway between my house and the fence, the one with the same lock it had had for 30 years, because I had never replaced it, and the key for it lived on my keychain along with everything else. They had changed the front lock. They had not found the side door. Thursday, 2:17 p.m. Agent Reeves and Agent Callahan were parked 2 blocks north. Detective Marsh was half a block south. A second FBI vehicle, 3 additional agents, was staged at the end of the street. Diane was at her kitchen table with her phone and a recording of our entire last conversation open and time-stamped. I let myself in through the side door. The kitchen looked wrong in the way that rooms look wrong when someone else has rearranged them. The same bones, different energy. Patricia had moved things. The dish rack was on the wrong side. There was a coffee maker on the counter that wasn't mine. I could hear Howard in William's study, on the phone. His voice carries. I had noticed that over many dinners in the self-assured way of men who have never had a reason to moderate their volume. I moved down the hallway, my cane on the hardwood. He was behind William's desk as I'd expected. Jacket off, sleeves rolled, the posture of a man settling into someone else's space as if it had always been his. He was describing, to whoever was on the other end of the call, the mechanics of how he had used my banking credentials to finance the acquisition of the property across the street. Specific details, account numbers, transfer amounts, the name of the shell company. Every word recorded on the device in my pocket and on the FBI's monitoring equipment 2 blocks north. I pushed the door fully open. Howard turned. The color left his face in a way I can only describe as total. Not a flicker, not a flinch, but a complete draining, like water from a tub. He recovered in about 3 seconds. I gave him credit for that. This house doesn't belong to you, he said, standing. The trust documents your son used to transfer this property are missing a signature, I said, moving toward the filing cabinet where I knew William had kept the original trust paperwork. I had put a copy there myself the week before my surgery. Diane Anderson's signature, the co-trustee. Without it, every document you filed is legally void. The county recorder's office will be notified this afternoon. His associate, a younger man I didn't recognize standing near the window, began moving toward the door. Howard didn't move. He stepped around the desk and grabbed my arm, hard. My hip, still healing, still fragile in the particular way that healing things are fragile, sent a sharp report of pain up through my side that made my vision go white at the edges for a moment. Give me that phone, he said. I raised my voice, deliberately, clearly, 2 words. Come in. The front door opened, then the side door, simultaneously. Then, faintly, a sound from the back of the house, the garden door that William had installed in 1997 and that I was the only one alive who still remembered. FBI, hands where we can see them. Agent Reeves was first through the front, Agent Callahan through the side, 3 more agents through the back. Howard released my arm. His hands went up with the automatic compliance of a man who has spent years calculating risk and has just miscalculated for the last time. They had Howard in handcuffs within 30 seconds of entry. Jessica's arrest happened at the Lakeview Salon on 5th Street at 3:04 p.m. while she was waiting for her color to process. According to Agent Callahan, who described it to me that evening with the careful neutrality of a professional relaying information, Jessica had screamed about her father's attorneys for approximately 4 minutes before going quiet. Patricia Thompson was arrested at an open house 2 miles away, where she had been posing as a prospective buyer, gathering information, Reeves explained to me later, on the interior of a property they'd been planning to acquire next. The homeowner, a woman in her mid-70s who had no idea she'd been a target, was described as shaken. By 4:30 p.m., FBI agents in Seattle had executed simultaneous warrants at the address the Thompsons used as their operational base there. The network was larger than the local case had suggested. 7 additional properties across 3 states, 12 more victims identified in the warrant documents, a paper trail that agents described, in the brief conversation I overheard in my front hallway, as remarkably complete. Diane had given them the missing piece. We had given them the active case. The Seattle warrant had been ready for 6 months, waiting for exactly this moment. The entire operation collapsed in one afternoon. I sat on my front porch in the late October light, my cane across my knees, and watched federal agents carry boxes out of my house. Stephen came home at 5:22 p.m. He turned the corner onto Claremont Avenue and stopped walking. I could see him from the porch, 2 houses down, the stillness of a person trying to process a visual that doesn't fit the expectation he'd been carrying all day. Federal vehicles, uniformed agents, boxes. He walked the rest of the way slowly. I watched his face cycle through several things in the time it took him to reach the front walk. He saw me. Mom. His voice came out different than it had 8 days ago in the doorway. Smaller, like something in it had been removed. What's happening? Consequences, I said. Agent Reeves stepped off the porch behind me. Mr. Wilson, we need you to come with us for questioning. You are not under arrest at this time, but we have some questions about documents filed with the county recorder's office and about wire transfers from an account on which you are listed. Stephen looked at Agent Reeves, then at the federal vehicle at the curb where Jessica sat in the back seat, mascara tracking down both cheeks, still in the salon cape she'd been wearing when they found her. He looked at me, the boy who had cried over Beatles, the teenager who had taught himself to parallel park in this driveway, the man who had stood in this doorway 8 days ago and told his mother she couldn't come home. Where am I supposed to go? He asked. I let the question sit between us in the autumn air. Let it exist completely, without filling it. The same place you sent me, I said. He didn't have an answer for that. Nobody would have. The legal aftermath was, as these things are, long. Howard and Patricia Thompson were charged federally with wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, document forgery, and conspiracy. Charges that, Agent Reeves explained when he came to take my full statement, carried a combined exposure of 30 to 40 years. The Seattle charges, filed simultaneously, added another set of counts. Howard's associate, a man named Kevin Dyer, who had been with the Thompsons for 6 years and had handled the false notary stamps, cooperated with investigators within 48 hours and provided enough additional documentation to close 4 cases that had been open for years. Jessica was charged with conspiracy and receipt of stolen property. She had known, Dyer confirmed, since the operation began. The emerald earrings were listed in the inventory of stolen personal property recovered from the residence. They were returned to me in a small evidence bag 11 days after the arrests. I put them back in William's mahogany box. I sat on the edge of my bed and held the box for a long time. Stephen was not charged. The investigation determined that he had been told Jessica's family were helping manage the house while Mom was in the hospital, and that the documents he'd been asked to sign had been described to him as administrative paperwork. He had not understood what he was signing. He had not asked. That distinction between active guilt and the particular moral failure of not asking is one I have thought about more than I expected to. He called me from his sister-in-law's couch 3 days after the arrests, where he was sleeping with the contents of his car and a borrowed phone charger. I need to explain, he said. I know, I said. They told me, he started. I know what they told you, I said. I also know that you stood in my doorway and said the words, Stephen. Whatever they told you, you were the one standing there. Silence. I know, he said. I believe that you didn't understand the full extent of what was happening, I said. I also know that you had been letting them make decisions for months, that you had stopped picking up the phone, that you had made it easy for them because it was easier than being present. He didn't deny it. That's not criminal, I said, but it's not nothing. He came to the house after some time had passed. We sat in the kitchen, which I had restored as precisely as I could to the arrangement it had been in before Patricia rearranged it. He drank tea he didn't really want. I watched him try to find words that were adequate and come up short, repeatedly, in the way that people do when what they've done is larger than language can properly address. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You don't fix it, I said. You start from where you are and you do differently. Those aren't the same thing. He nodded. I did not tell him it was all right. It wasn't all right, but he was my son, and I was 68 years old, and William was gone, and And some things are complicated in ways that simple categories don't hold. We are finding our way, slowly, without pretending the distance is smaller than it is. The house is mine, was always mine technically. The void transfer means it never wasn't. Frank Delaney, William's attorney, who came out of semi-retirement to handle the reinstatement paperwork because he said he'd be damned if anyone else touched it, filed the corrective deed the week after the arrests. The county recorder's office processed it in 4 days. The rezoning variance the Thompsons had filed was denied by the City Planning Commission in December, once the nature of the Thompson Group's operation became part of the public record. 3 of my neighbors whose properties had been acquired through similar schemes are in the process of recovering them through civil litigation. Diane is advising 2 of them on her own time because she said she has nothing better to do in retirement and finds the paperwork satisfying. I am walking without the cane most days now. Dr. Marsh, who sent me a card when the story appeared in the local paper. A journalist named Carmen Ruiz covered the Thompson arrests in a piece that ran in both the city paper and was picked up by 3 regional outlets. Said my recovery has exceeded what he originally projected. He credited the walks I have been taking every morning through my neighborhood. I credit the walks to William's garden, which I cannot see from the Fairview Inn, and which I missed during those 6 days, more than I would have predicted. It blooms every spring. That detail still surprises me. 11 years after William planted the last section. He chose perennials deliberately. He was a man who thought about what would last, and every April they come back without any help from me. The yellow tulips nearest the fence, the climbing rose on the south wall, the patch of lavender that is spread 3 times wider than he originally staked it. I tend it now. I'm not good at it the way he was, but I'm learning. It turns out there's quite a lot of time in a life you've reclaimed to learn things. Howard Thompson was sentenced to 19 years in federal prison, plus restitution. His attorney called the sentence excessive. Agent Reeves, who called to tell me the verdict, described his own reaction as professionally appropriate. I could hear something else underneath it, something quieter and more personal, and I didn't ask him to name it. Patricia received 12 years. Kevin Dyer, for his cooperation, received 36 months plus probation. Jessica pleaded to a reduced charge and received 5 years, 2 to be served, the remainder on probation. She and Stephen are no longer married. He told me that, simply and without drama, over the phone one Sunday evening. I said I was sorry. He said, "You don't have to be." I know, I said. I am anyway. There is a version of this story in which my son becomes the villain, the man who stood in the doorway, who let them in, who signed the papers without asking. That version is not wrong. It's just not complete. He was manipulated by people who were professionals at manipulating. He was also a man who had grown comfortable letting other people handle things that were his responsibility to handle. Both of those things are true simultaneously. I am 68 years old, and I have learned that most of the people who hurt you are carrying something complicated, and that understanding why doesn't mean excusing what. But it does mean you can sometimes keep the door open without inviting the old patterns back in. I keep the door open, with conditions, at a pace that makes sense for where we are. William would have done the same thing, I think. He was always better than me at holding complexity without needing to resolve it into something simpler. The emerald earrings are back in the mahogany box. I don't wear them often. I wore them the day the verdict came down. I sat in the back of the courtroom, Diane on my left, Agent Reeves nodding across the aisle, and I wore them. And when Howard Thompson was let out, I thought of William choosing them from the case at the jeweler on 5th Street, thinking about what I would like, thinking about me. Some things are not for other people. That's not selfishness. It's just the truth. After the sentencing, Diane and I ate lunch at a restaurant we'd been going to since 1988. We ordered the same things we always ordered. We talked about our children, her garden, a book she'd been reading, the particular quality of the November light. We didn't talk about the case because the case was done. At one point, she looked at me across the bread basket and said, "You knew, didn't you, that something was going to happen?" I had a feeling, I said. You always have a feeling. 31 years in compliance, I said. You learn to trust the pattern before you can name it, she smiled, the small, precise one. To Eleanor, she said, lifting her water glass, my mother's name, the woman who taught me that you don't announce what you know. You wait, and you document, and you let the truth do the work that no amount of arguing ever could. To Eleanor, I said. The light through the restaurant window was the particular gold of late autumn, the kind that makes everything look like it's being preserved. I thought about my house, the hardwood floors, William's desk, the garden that comes back every spring. I thought about the side door, the key on my keychain, the 30-year-old lock that nobody had thought to change. I had known every door in that house. They had known none of them. That in the end was the whole difference.